The house that had cradled every birthday, every scraped knee, every whispered bedtime prayer felt unfamiliar in its borrowed glamour. A childhood shell lacquered for a wedding night that had already soured by the time the last sparkler fizzled in the garden and the auntie's laughter slipped into the hedges. Lilies crowded the hallway with their heavy sweetness. Candles coughed out warm, honeyed light, and the reception cake, three tiers of frosted optimism, leaned in its box like a drunk uncle telling one story too many, while I stood in the doorway of the room that was supposed to be ours and stared at the dent his body left in the mattress as if it were a crater where a star had fallen and died. Leon's jacket hung on the chair with careless confidence, one cufflink still fastened, the other glinting on the dresser like a loose tooth, and when I pressed his name on my phone, the ringtone tumbled into silence, then into voicemail, then into that thin, humiliating nothing that feels colder than winter air. I called again. 3 times, 5, spoke his name like a password that should open a door in the universe, and all I got back was my own breath fogging the screen and the corridor's old bones settling under the weights of history. People always say houses remember, and ours remembered everything, where the floorboards sighed under Daddy's step after night shifts, where the wall chipped the year Zuri practiced pirouettes in socks, where Mama pressed her ear to the radio during storms. So when the first sound slipped across the hall, a soft thud followed by a gasp stitched with a smile, the house faithfully carried it to me, unedited. Denial arrived on schedule with pretty excuses. Maybe a late night movie, maybe a FaceTime, maybe a window catching wind, but the second sound undressed the lie. A headboard giving the wall a shy kiss, a hush spoken in a voice I knew, like my own reflection, low and coaxing. The syllable shh, shaped by the same lips that had promised me forever 5 hours earlier. I took one step into the hallway, the silk of my dress clinging to my thighs with static and sweat, and the clock on the mantel cleared its throat and struck midnight in 12 patient knocks, each one a judge's gavel. That was when I saw it, small as a secret but darker than any shadow on lace, a rust-brown fingerprint at my hip, as though someone had pressed the truth into me while the band played our first dance, and I let my head rest on Leon's shoulder to memorize the exact place it fit. It wasn't mine. I checked my cuticles, my palms, the tiny nick near my ring finger from wrestling a stubborn zipper that morning, and the sight of it split the night cleanly, before and after, bride and witness. Amara? I said to no one, and to the girl I had been until this hour, because speaking my name out loud steadied the floor under my feet. And then I moved like I had when I was a child, sneaking to the kitchen for water, placing my steps where the boards didn't whine, skirting the spot that tattled just outside Zuri's room. Her door was cracked, the way a secret is cracked when it wants to be found, a sliver of yellow light drawing a blade on the hallway. Breath pulled under my collarbone and wouldn't rise, my spine turned to a tuning fork, and in the taut quiet, I could hear small things made large by humiliation. The clink of a bracelet against wood, fabric dragged over skin, a laugh that tried to hide inside another laugh and failed. I raised my knuckles to knock, and my hand felt disobedient, as if the nerves belonged to someone bolder, someone meaner, someone I might be tomorrow. I didn't knock. I just stood there and learned the contour of a new reality, that love can be a house with all the lights on and still contain a locked room you never knew to search, that loyalty can be a language two people pretend to speak while trading glossaries behind your back. Somewhere in the kitchen, a champagne cork gave up quietly, a tiny pop like a sigh, and the smell of lilies swelled until it made me a little sick. I slid my phone into my palm and opened the voice recorder, because there are nights when truth must be bottled to keep it from evaporating by morning. pressed my finger to the screen until the red light blinked like a patient heart, and let the house testify. Shh, he breathed again, and the syllable arrived at my ear as a verdict. My name washed out of it, replaced by the word baby, which I had thought belonged to me. My throat burned. My eyes didn't. Tears would be a luxury for later, after evidence. The fingerprints on my dress sat where a husband's hand should, and I understood with a clarity that felt like fever that I had not lost a man so much as discovered the plot he'd smuggled into my life. I eased back from the door, every step a stitch, sealing me shut long enough to survive, then turned toward the room that wore our fresh vows like a costume, and felt the first hard seed of resolve catch in my. I peeled myself out of the gown the way a snake wriggles free of a skin that suddenly feels too tight to breathe in, the satin whispering against my knees as if it had its own opinions about loyalty, and stood in slip and bare feet in the room that had been staged like an advertisement for forever. Roses irrigating the air with sweetness, candles still working overtime to pretend this was romance and not triage. Leon's cufflink on the dresser, winking like a bad secret. I needed proof that it wasn't just the trembling of a house and the bruise-colored fingerprint at my hip. Something that would still be undeniable when the sun came and everyone's voices got reasonable and tidy. So I went to his jacket, the one he'd thrown over the chair with that boyish carelessness I had once mistaken for ease, slid my hand into the inner pocket, and found the rectangular certainty of his phone. It woke at my touch without a passcode, either because he trusted me or because he was certain I'd never look, and I wasn't sure which insulted me more. And my face became a laboratory of expressions as the screen bloomed with messages like mold on fruit. A thread pinned to the top named Starling, the pet name Leon used for anything he wanted to keep light and airborne. I tapped, and the evening unspooled in tidy timestamps. 6:42 p.m., I'll sneak out after speeches. 9:17 p.m., door will be cracked. 11:56 p.m., be quiet, she's still awake. And what arrested me wasn't only the choreography of betrayal, but the small domestic details that made it obscene. The sticker of a silver heart, the photo of a shoulder unknew the way you know home, a comma-shaped birthmark near the collarbone that had slept inches from my face during childhood storms. Zuri's shoulder, Zuri's mark, Zuri's casual audacity captured in pixels, and with it a video thumbnail, a blurred laugh, a robe tie hanging loose, my robe, the one Mama gave me in a ribboned box the week I got engaged. My thumb hovered over the play triangle, and then retreated because there are images that once seen can never be untasted, can never be washed out of the mouth of memory, and I wasn't ready to drink anything that bitter yet. I scrolled instead, past the tender logistics into the prelude, little nicks in the timeline I had missed. You sure she won't notice? She notices everything but believes the best. God, that's what I love about her. The compliment landed like a slap because it was accurate, because it meant my kindness had been cataloged and weaponized, because somewhere between our engagement party and tonight, they had turned me into the safety rail that let them lean farther over the edge. I set the phone down as if it might bite, then opened the top drawer of the dresser where Mama keeps her emergency box. Documents, spare keys, postage stamps, a roll of old film like a curled fossil, and pulled out the yellow legal pad she uses when life insists on being written down. My handwriting came out steadier than my pulse as I listed what I knew in nouns and verbs that wouldn't flinch. Fingerprint on gown, midnight sounds, messages to Starling, video thumbnail, not watched, robe, mine, on her, prenup clause, 14. Adultery voids support. I took a breath and added a sentence I would need tomorrow when someone tried to teach me my own story. I am not crazy. I am observant. The house is a witness. I pressed record on my own phone and let the red dot blink while the hallway exhaled its quiet, catching the soft percussion of the headboard once more like a metronome for cruelty. Catching the low mill murmur that used to pour into my ear at 2 a.m. and make every fear climb down from the furniture. Now it just made my spine stiffen into a tool. I moved to the mirror and studied the woman in it the way a forensics tech studies a scene. Lipstick blotted off, eyes dry not because there was nothing to cry, but because grief had rerouted into action. The fingerprint like a punctuation mark on a chapter break, then lifted the skirt pulled at my feet and folded it carefully, because rage doesn't require wreckage to be real. I thought of the stories Zuri and I told each other under quilts when we were small, of promises we made to be each other's forever person if the world got mean. And then of the teenage years when she started learning that attention could be milked like a cow, and I learned to step aside to keep the peace. It was funny in a bleak way that I had once envied her ability to live at a louder volume while she envied my credibility with quiet rooms. Tonight, our envies had found a cruel equilibrium. I set Leon's phone beside my legal pad and snapped photos of the messages, then sent them to my cloud the way a person trapped by a rever throws evidence up to a helicopter. If tomorrow brought gaslight, I wanted enough wattage to blind it. Finally, drawn by the ancient habit of wanting adulthood to answer for itself, I called Mama, not to cry, but to say the lines that would set us moving. Something happened. I have proof. I need you to bring the pen. We grew up sharing a wall thin as paper and twice as willing to tear. And on the other side of it, Zuri learned early how to turn attention into currency, while I learned how to turn silence into a shield. At 6, she braided my hair so tight my scalp sang. At 8, she climbed onto tabletops to turn dinner into theater. And by 13, she had already discovered that a well-timed laugh could erase a sin faster than an apology ever could, while I hoarded small reliabilities, report cards, clean drawers, the habit of listening until people forgot they were confessing. So when Leon entered our orbit like a man auditioning for permanence, his wool coat smelling faintly of cedar and the museum's cloakroom, it made sense that he was drawn to the quiet first and the gleam second. To me, because he said I made rooms feel less like stages and more like homes. To her, because he liked the way light kept finding her cheekbones. And I, foolish in my believer's bones, imagined we were 3 instruments in one honest song. Memory is a cruel editor, resplicing scenes with captions you didn't read the first time, and now, pacing the corridor at midnight with the recorder humming like a tiny generator in my palm, I found myself replaying every moment that had worn a warning label I chose not to translate. Zuri calling him professor with the teasing tilt, Leon calling her starling after a flock we'd once watched swirl in unison over the river. "See, they move like a thought," he said. And the time I went to the kitchen for wine and came back to find them laughing at some joke made of me, their eyes soft with fondness and something else I didn't name because I didn't want to be the kind of woman who polices her sister's smile. I thought of the dress fitting, where Zuri turned me in front of the mirror like a cake on a stand and said, "He won't be able to breathe when he sees you." And of Leon's bachelor dinner, where he came home late with a new cologne that I pretended not to smell on the scarf Zuri borrowed for luck. And of Mama lowering her voice the way women do when a truth tries to climb out of discretion. Asking lightly if we'd considered a prenup just so the paper knows what the heart already intends, and how Leon kissed her cheek and said, "Absolutely," for her protection, like a gentleman who understood weather and timber and time. I'd mistaken charm for craftsmanship and kinship for covenant. But covenant is something you choose over and over, especially when it's inconvenient. And on this night, my sister had chosen thrill over kin. My husband had chosen appetite over honor, and the house had been deputized into a witness stand. Grief, when it first touches you, is simultaneously slow syrup and electric wire, and I could feel both, thick disbelief pulling around my ankles, bright sharpness strafing my skin. Yet beneath it, a colder, steadier current gathered, the old survival animal that had watched our childhood budget stretch at month's end and had learned to count without moving lips. I opened my notes again, wrote down everything I'd trained myself to notice about construction, how Zuri always escalated attention before holidays, how Leon's phone face down became his new habit after the engagement, how "you're overthinking" had replaced "tell me more" in his lexicon, and felt a fierce little pride at the way my mind could build a bridge as my heart burned, a pride that didn't taste like vengeance yet, just competence. and competence is oxygen when the room goes smoky. I thought of the myth we'd been sold, that betrayal arrives like a shattering, fast, and cinematic. But in my life, it had arrived like drip, drip, drip. A patient leak behind the wall you paint and repaint until the bubble swells and finally bursts wet through the pretty color. I remembered the gallery night, the first, when Leon asked me what I saw in a photograph of a corridor with too many doors, and I said, light pretending to be exit, and he smiled like I was a secret he wanted to keep. And Zuri, when I introduced them later, said, "You two speak in riddles. I prefer answers." And he laughed like a man who wanted both the riddle and the answer because he thought the universe owed him plurality. The realization didn't break me, it focused me, like a camera that finally finds the eye and not the cheek. I tucked the recorder into my slip, pressed my palm flat to the wall we'd once shared, and let it transmit not just the present treachery, but a lifetime of footnotes writing themselves into the margins, a fugue of evidence that said you weren't naive for loving, but you would be for staying blind. In the mirror over the console table, the one Mama bought at a yard sale and silvered back herself, I caught my face and recognized a woman I had seen before in our family. The one who gets up from the table when the feast turns poisonous, takes the recipe book and starts a kitchen elsewhere. Whatever came next, confrontation or silence, paper or fire, would be chosen not from panic, but principle. And as the clock moved past 12 like a patient metronome, I turned away from the door across the hall, from the names I used to speak with reverence, and back towards my mother's house within a house, towards the drawer where she kept pens, envelopes, and the old, unglamorous tools that make a life survivable. The door surrendered an inch, as if the room itself had grown a conscience, a thin blade of light cutting the hallway and finding my face, and in that slit I saw a piece of him. Leon's shoulder, the familiar hinge where neck turns to back, a geography I had once memorized with the patience of prayer, before Zuri's laugh spilled over it like champagne that had forgotten its manners. I didn't knock, because knocking implies permission, and permission was a currency already stolen. So I laid my palm on the panel and pushed until the door's small gasp became an opening big enough to stand inside the harm. The scene arranged itself with insulting composure. My robe tied with a lazy bow at Zuri's waist. The bed I hadn't slept in creased with activity. Leon's tie draped over the lamp like a flag announcing occupation. And for a second nobody moved, as if stillness could rewind time. "She'll hear," Leon had said a minute before, oblivious to the recorder humming in my slip. But now he said nothing, just stood with the softness of a man who'd used up his courage on the wrong challenge. Zuri lifted her chin first, because audacity was always her native tongue, and offered the kind of smile you put on when a camera surprises you. "You left your own party early," she said, as though the scandal were my scheduling, and before I could decide whether to laugh or throw the lamp, I felt the steadiness I'd been practicing all night take the wheel of my mouth. "I didn't leave," I answered, voice low enough to belong to someone older and less forgiving. "I arrived," and raised my phone so the red recording dot glowed like a small, patient witness between us. Leon reached for his tie, and not for an explanation, which told me everything. Then tried for the oldest script. "This isn't what it looks like," and I let the silence that followed wear him like a hair shirt. Zuri broke first. Not into apology, but into thesis, because she likes to win debates more than she likes to fix anything. "You chose a man who wants everything," she said, letting the robe gape a fraction wider in a gesture that felt like punctuation. "I simply chose not to pretend. And if the line had been a poem, I might have admired its clean cruelty. But it was my life, and admiration is a luxury for spectators." The lilies from the hallway threw sweetness into the room until it soured, and in that thick perfume I tasted the original sin of our childhood bargain. How often I had given Zuri the bigger slice to keep peace. How often she had mistaken my softness for absence. And I realized that standing still would only draft me back into that contract. "You two will want to dress," I said, my voice a neat instrument. "We have logistics." And the word landed on Leon like cold water. He tried for the second oldest script. "We were drunk. It was a mistake." but the timestamps on his phone were sober as church, and the bruised brown fingerprint at my hip pulsed like a metronome for truth. I listed calmly what tomorrow would require: the key cards, the photographer's release, the ring insurance, the prenup clause that loves daylight. Zuri rolled her eyes with the same elegance she used to roll pastry dough, then slid off the bed with a feline grace that once charmed teachers into extensions and now tried to charm me into numbness. "You'll thank me one day," she said, which was such a ridiculous line I nearly did laugh, because only people drunk on their own cleverness think devastation is a seminar. Leon finally found a string of words that faced me, not the floor. "I do love you." And it would have wounded if he hadn't looked simultaneously at my sister, if his pupils hadn't flickered like guilty moths toward the brightest flame. Love, I understood, is not a feeling here, but a leash, and I was done wearing collars. "Don't use that word like a key to rooms you've already burned," I said, and watched the sentence land, not like a slap, but like a lock. I placed my ring on the dresser, beside the second cufflink, the three of them making a small constellation of endings, and slid the robe belt from Zuri's waist with 2 fingers, not to expose her, but to reclaim the thing Mama had bought for me, my name stitched on its tag. There was a flicker then, something human in my sister's face, a weather change across arrogance, and for a heartbeat I saw the child who once slept in my bed on thunder nights. But mercy that arrives without repentance is just bait, and I was done being hooked. "Get dressed," I repeated, the recorder steady as a metronome in my slip. "Then go," and to Leon, because men like him respond to logistics like dogs to whistles. "I'll email the lawyer by noon. You will respond. You will not return here without notice." And to the room itself, because houses deserve closure, I turned off the lamp and made us all briefly inhabit the dark we've been generating. When the light came back, they were smaller, somehow, not because I'd grown, but because the truth had adjusted the room's scale, and I stepped into the hallway with the robe over my arm, the red dot still pulsing, the lilies still exhaling, and felt the first clean air of the night fill my lungs like a signature. I called Mama at 1:03 a.m. because there are certain hours when you either lie to yourself or you dial the one person who has never needed subtitles to understand you. And she picked up on the second ring with that soft, sandpapered hello that always makes me think of churches at dawn. I said, "Something happened," and she didn't ask what like a gossip. She asked, "Where are you standing?" like a medic. And when I told her in the hallway between our rooms, she said, "Good, hallways are for transitions." Then, "I'm coming," and the line clicked quiet. 15 minutes later, her headlights crawled across the living room ceiling like tired angels, and she stepped inside in her long storm coat, eucalyptus and clean rain riding in with her. Not a tissue in sight, just a yellow legal pad, a zippered folder, and that steel gentleness she keeps for days when the world forgets to be kind. She took one look at me, still in the slip, hair loosened like a flag after wind, and didn't touch my face or ask me to sit. She just moved to the kitchen table and said, "Say it once." So I did, and the story poured out of me without theatrics. The midnight noises, the fingerprint like a bruise on lace, the messages to Starling, the robe, the door cracked like a confession. Mama nodded at each beat the way you nod at a recipe you know by heart. To the thud, to the text at 11:56, to the headboard kiss. And when I was done, she tore a sheet from the pad and wrote at the top in block letters, "Facts first." Then drew a line down the center of the page and titled the columns, "Evidence and Action." "Grief is fog," she said, uncapping her pen with her teeth like she was about to suture something. "Plans are headlights." And she began to list with the muscle memory of a woman who has survived more than anyone gave her credit for. Photos of messages? Done. Audio recordings? Ongoing. Phone in our possession? Yes. Prenup clause 14? Highlight. Ring insurance? Call in morning. Photographer's release? Email at 9. Venue contract? Verify payment terms. Locksmith? Tomorrow by noon. "You will not speak to them again tonight," she added. Silence is a strategy. And I realized my mother had turned our kitchen into a small war room while the lilies in the hallway kept over-perfuming the air like a lie, trying to drown out the truth. She stood, made tea with the precision of a ritual, kettle, rinse, steep, honey, a crack of ginger between her thumbs, then set a mug in front of me and pressed my fingers around it until the heat persuaded my hands to belong to me again. "Breathe," she said, and I did, in through the nose like a swimmer, out through the mouth like someone blowing out a candle she never wanted in the first place. When I told her Leon had tried the scripts, "This isn't what it looks like. We were drunk. I love you," his mouth tightened into that small, tired smile she wears for men who confuse appetite for love. And she said, "He speaks the language of loopholes. We will answer in the language of clauses," then flipped to the prenup copy from her folder and underlined, slow and careful, the line that said, "Infidelity voids support." Signed by both parties in the blush of engagement when he'd called it purely symbolic, and I believed that symbol could be a kind of amulet. Thunder didn't roll, no dramatic soundtrack swelled, just the tiny metronome of the kitchen clock and the scratch of her pen, and the city breathing beyond the windows. "You can sleep in my room," she said after we'd mapped the first 48 hours. Attorney at 10, dress returned by 11. Bank passwords changed now, since the quiet is friendlier to transitions than day. And in the morning, you will choose between revenge and freedom. Both are heavy, but one is a meal and the other is a door. And when I looked at her, trying to read which she preferred, she shook her head and tapped my chest. "You will know by this," as though my sternum were a compass. I asked, "What if I want both?" And she smiled the way a coach smiles at a player finally asking the right question. "Then we will arrange the order so neither poisons you." And in that moment, I remembered every time she turned scarcity into supper, shame into strategy, heartbreak into homework. We changed the Wi-Fi password, logged out of shared accounts, moved the ring into a small velvet box, not because it was sacred, but because I refused to let it roll under a chair and turn up months later like a curse. Mama wrote a short, clean text from my phone to Leon, "We will speak through counsel," then another to Zuri, "Leave by morning," key on the table, and set both to send at 7 a.m. because timing is a form of dignity. When the tea was gone and the plan was inked, the house went quiet in a different register, like a fever breaking. And Mama walked me to her room, which still smelled like shea butter and the stern comfort of childhood. She pulled back the quilt, kissed my temple the way she did the night before every first day of school, and said, "You are not leaving anything you can't rebuild." And for the first time since midnight, I felt something other than the bright ache of injury, a low, steady hum of continuation. I lay there listening to the old pipes tick, to the fridge breathe, to the city carry on, and thought about doors, how they can be slammed or opened or simply walked past. And somewhere between thinking and sleeping, I understood that whatever else they had stolen tonight, they had given me this, the chance to choose the architecture of my next life with my eyes. Morning came in like a blunt verdict, unapologetically bright, no curtains kind enough to soften it. And for a second, I didn't know where I was, only that the quilt smelled like shea butter and eucalyptus, and that absence can make a room feel newly ventilated. Then the clock on Mama's dresser clicked to 7, and the 2 messages she scheduled leapt from my phone like trained birds. One to Leon, "We will speak through counsel." One to Zuri, "Leave by morning, key on the table." And I lay there long enough to feel the relief of automation, the comfort that some hard things were already doing themselves before I even stood up. In the kitchen, Mama was at the stove with her hair wrapped and her posture the same as every school day dawn of my childhood. Except the battlefield today was paperwork and passwords and the quiet insistence of dignity, not permission slips and lost socks. She slid a plate toward me, 2 eggs, a triangle of toast, fruit in a chipped bowl, and said, "Eat something neutral, the way you'd advise someone before anesthesia." Through the windows, the city looked newly scrubbed, the sky a rinsed blue, nothing of last night's treachery visible from this altitude. And then the front door opened without a knock, and Leon was in our kitchen in yesterday's suit, face raw with the scrubbed look of a man who only recently met consequence. He started speaking before I could stand. My name, a plea, a string of rationalizations slung like laundry. But Mama's hand lifted, a conductor stalling an orchestra, and pointed to the phone on the table where the attorney's contact sat primed like an emergency number. "You got my message," I said without looking up. And the way his mouth opened and closed made me think of fish pulled into daylight. "We don't have to do lawyers," he said, false gentleness veneering Tannic. "We can be human." And I finally met his eyes and said, "Last night you chose what kind of human you were going to be with me." Then gestured to the chair like a judge inviting a defendant to sit, civil, contained, procedural. Zuri drifted in behind him wearing sunglasses as if dawn itself were paparazzi, my robe exchanged for black leggings and a shirt that announced a yoga studio she had visited twice. She dropped the key on the table with a metal clink that sounded more like relief than surrender, and went straight to the fridge like she still lived here. And something about that casual trespass, condensed milk moved, favorite jar opened, made the air tighten. "Your message was rude," she said, unscrewing a lid. "You could have said please." And Mama, without turning from the stove, answered, "We use please for favors, not for boundaries." Then slid another plate onto the counter with a thud that ended conversation. Leon tried for penitent competence, which had always been his superpower at work. Project plans, corrective action, reachable milestones, and I watched it fail in the soft domestic light because there is no Gantt chart for trust repaired by people who won't stop wanting applause. "You can speak to Naomi," I said, tapping the lawyer's card, "anytime after 10. And he nodded too fast, the way terrified men nod when they think speed is respect. Zuri, perhaps allergic to structures she didn't author, rolled her eyes and said, "You're making this bigger than it needs to be. Marriages survive worse." And I felt a wash of old, weary love for the girl who never learned the difference between spectacle and scale. "Our marriage didn't even survive the night," I said, and the sentence rang so clean it cut the room into before and after. Leon reached into his pocket and set my ring on the table, not flat, but on its edge, where it wobbled a moment before deciding which side to choose, and said, "I don't expect you to forgive me. I'm asking you not to destroy me." And I thought of an email I once drafted to a landlord. "As you created the urgency is yours to carry," and slid the attorney's card toward him by exactly 1 inch, an allowance and a refusal. At once, the locksmith texted while he was still standing there, 10:30 arrival, and Mama replied with a single thumbs up because not every transaction needs pros. By 9:15, the photographer had sent the private gallery and a polite note promising confidentiality. By 9:40, the venue confirmed our deposit would be partially refunded due to exceptional circumstances after Mama sent exactly 3 lines and 1 clause. Small, reasonable victories shaped the morning like bricks laid true. Zuri finished her yogurt and finally looked at me without pose, and what moved across her face was not regret so much as comprehension. The sudden knowledge that the room's physics had changed and she could no longer rearrange it with the performance. "You don't have to make me your villain," she said, voice smaller, and I answered with the first mercy I could afford. "I don't have to make you anything. You did that work yourself." Then stood and carried my plate to the sink, because ordinary gestures can be armor. Leon stepped back from the table, empty pockets in that oddly theatrical way of men who want you to know they're unarmed, and said to Mama, because he always addressed authority when love failed him, "I will cooperate." And she nodded, like a teacher taking attendance, then handed him a manila envelope of copies of what we'd already sent digitally. Redundancy, our new religion. At 10 o'clock precisely, Naomi called on speaker, her voice even and unruffled, laying out next steps like stones across a river. 30 days of separation, discovery requests, transfer of keys today, mediation window next week. I said yes in the places I'd circled on the legal pad, and no in the places that would keep me from bleeding out midstream. When the locksmith arrived, his drill briefly drowned out everything else, a fierce practical music. And when the new keys glittered in my palm, small and cold and real, I felt the first uncomplicated satisfaction of the day. We walked Leon and Zuri to the door. No shouting, no names thrown like dishes, and I watched their backs move down the path we swept for guests yesterday. and knew with a steadiness I could climb like stairs that whatever storm still waited would pass. Not because storms are merciful, but because I was already building higher ground. The internet loves a spectacle, but it obeys receipts. So after the locksmith's drill quieted and the front door clicked with its new, obedient lock, I went to the small desk by the window, where sun laid a neat rectangle on the wood and turned my grief into a project. I opened the photographer's private gallery and chose images with the precision of a surgeon. My face laughing under a veil, Mama's hand on my shoulder, Leon looking at me in the way that once read as promise and now read as foreshadowing, and I dragged them into a folder called Evidence. Then layered the midnight audio beneath a few clips, not to publish, not yet, but to make a record that would not buckle under the weight of anyone else's revisionist wish. The red light on the recorder had been a heartbeat all night, and now my laptop's timeline became a quiet river carrying facts downstream. The thud, the breathy shh, the headboard's polite knock, my own steady voice naming the time, the place, the players, while outside the city moved on with the indifferent productivity of weekday traffic. I exported files, stamped timestamps, backed everything to two clouds and a small thumb drive painted cherry red, then slid that drive into the old teacup on Mama's shelf where we used to stash loose buttons, because history likes rhyme. Next came the letters, one to Leon set in clean, unadorned font, 12 sentences long, each a beam you could stand on. Acknowledgement of separation, council contact, key transfer complete, no contact except through attorneys, the inventory of joint purchases I would not be fighting over because I wanted Dayakite more than I wanted plates, the reminder of the clause we all signed in soft lighting and champagne breath. I read it aloud once to be certain the words didn't wobble, then sent it, CCing Naomi, and watched the little paper plane icon fly off like a courier who understood urgency without panic. The second letter refused to be an email. It wanted ink, so I pulled Mama's fountain pen from her drawer, the one that turns every sentence into a vow, and wrote to Zuri in the voice I would use if we were 12 again under a blanket fort. Honesty, low and steady. I told her I would not perform a forgiveness I didn't own, that I would not campaign for a villain or audition for martyrdom, that I hoped one day she would want more than to be the brightest object in the room, that I loved the girl who once slept with her feet on my shins during storms, and that I did not recognize the woman who reached for my life like it was a prop. I did not ask her why. Why invites lies. I did not ask for apology. Apology without amends is confetti. I folded the pages, slid them into an envelope without a stamp, and addressed it to a future where I might choose to mail it or burn it without consulting anyone's idea of closure. At noon, with the house smelling like ginger and furniture polish, I booked a room across town at a business hotel that specialized in competence and citrus, not romance. Late checkout, balcony, a desk that looked like it could hold more than a vase, and I texted Mama the address. She replied with a simple go, which in our family means both leave and become. I packed deliberately. 2 dresses that didn't need ironing, sneakers and flats, a sweater with pockets deep enough for a phone and a plan, the prenup copy, the red thumb drive, the legal pad, and the robe reclaimed from Zuri, washed and folded, not because I wanted to wear it, but because I wanted to own the narrative of what it had been wrapped around. On my way out, I paused at the hallway mirror and really met my reflection. Not the bride or the patient strategist, but the woman whose life had just shed a skin. There was a calm there that felt earned, not gifted. Mama hugged me at the door with a fierceness that rearranged my bones into their correct places and said, "Text me when you're settled." Then added, almost conversationally, "A scale is the secret. Make choices sized to your strength today, not to anyone else's drama." And I felt the counsel slide into a pocket inside me where I could reach it later. The ride across town was ordinary. Billboards, a kid kicking a ball on a median, a man balancing a crate of eggs on a motorcycle, and the ordinariness was its own benediction, proof that I had not fallen out of the world. At the hotel, I signed my name with a hand that didn't shake, took the key card, and let the elevator carry me up, like a confession rising. The room smelled faintly of lemon and new chances. On the balcony, the city ward's gold afternoon, and for the first time since the clock tolled 12, I allowed my body to register itself, tired but not collapsed, hungry for something that wasn't sugar or vengeance, ready to be quiet. I sent Naomi the evidence link with a short note, "Please confirm receipt, proceeding per plan," and when her reply came back brisk and certain, a small anchor landed in my chest. Then I turned my phone face down, not as a performance, but as a boundary, and opened the balcony door wider so the air could rearrange the molecules inside me. I didn't cry, not because I was invincible, but because action had been my weeping, and I had sobbed enough in bullet points and file names. I wrote one line on the legal pad, the only line that mattered today. Revenge is a meal, freedom is a door. Eat later, walk now. Then I stood, hung my robe on the back of a chair like a flag reclaimed from the wrong army, and went to find dinner that tasted like endurance instead of evidence. Evening slid over the city like a silk scarf, dimming the hard edges into something wearable, and from the balcony of the citrus-clean hotel room, I watched office windows blink to sleep one by one until the skyline looked like a slow exhale. The air held that early night temperature that makes everything feel negotiable, even memory. And for the first time since midnight's verdict, I let the day loosen its grip. Keys glittering on the little desk like punctuation. The red thumb drive asleep in a teacup I'd carried here as a superstition. The robe reclaimed and folded on the chair like a treaty signed. My phone, face down by design, throbbed once. A stubborn pulse of the old world calling, and I turned it over because discipline is not the same thing as avoidance. An unknown number. "You were never the problem," it read, followed by another beat and a second text. I panicked. "I'm sorry, can we talk like adults?" There is a tone certain men adopt when they want absolution wholesale. A syntax that asks you to price your pain for bulk discount, and my body recognized it the way a hand recognizes heat. I typed the only reply I owed: "Please contact counsel. All communication through attorneys." And before he could send the paragraph that would perform new humility over old appetite, I switched the thread to silent and placed the phone back under the gravity of its own screen, as if it needed to learn the posture of quiet. Mama called then, not to reopen wounds, but to anchor the evening with the unremarkable. She had made jollof and put some in a lidded container with my name on masking tape. She had watered the lilies, even though we both agreed they overtalked a room. She had set my childhood alarm clock to wake me at 7 because early hours keep promises better. "Eat," she said, which in our dialect means keep living, and "sleep near the door," which means be ready for your own life. After we hung up, I stood there a long minute thinking about doors, how last night one had admitted me into harm, and tonight another opened onto the city's cobalt. Same hinge, different use. In the small kitchenette, I made tea the way she taught me. Rinse the nug, bruise the ginger, wait for the steam to sound like a soft admonition, then carried it back outside and rehearsed tomorrow in my head, not as a catastrophe, but as an itinerary. 9:30 with Naomi to sign the filings. 11 to return the dress with the fingerprint still on its hip like a fossil. 13 to buy flowers for no reason that needed defending. 15 to walk through the park and see if the starlings were practicing their murmurations yet. For a second, the thought of starlings threatened to pull me into the undertow of word associations. His nickname for Zuri, the flock moving like a thought, the evening they performed a sky riddle, and he called it proof that collective desire can be choreographed, my old self laughing into his shoulder. But memory is plastic, Mama says, and you can warm it in your hands until it takes a shape you can carry without bleeding. I breathed until the birds in my head were just birds again. Somewhere on a nearby balcony, two friends argued affectionately in the language of clinking cutlery and overlapping sentences, a tiny reminder that people keep their lives going beside your paused one, which is both unfair and a mercy. My phone vibrated once more, this time Naomi confirming the mediator's availability next week. A sentence so lean and competent that I felt my spine align to it. And then, as if the universe wanted to audition irony, a third message appeared from Zuri. No excuse will do, I know. I'm leaving town for a while. When you want to talk like sisters, I'll be where we used to eat mangoes on the stairs in August. I read it twice, not for hidden meanings but for weight, and decided to set it on the shelf of later, where some things ripen and some things rot without my tending. Below me, a taxi's headlights combed the street. Above me, a single star endured the city's glare. I finished the tea, washed the cup, turned off the balcony light, and stood in the doorway between outside and in, the hinge where decisions live, understanding that revenge would still be there tomorrow if I wanted a bite, that the meal doesn't spoil, but that tonight, the truer nourishment was rest so deep it returned me to myself. I pulled the curtains, set the childhood alarm clock, slid the new keys under my pillow like a talisman, and lay down in sheets that smelled of laundry and future. In the hush that followed, the house of my body, vacant rooms aired, locks changed, windows tested, settled around me with the small creaks of structure rediscovering its own integrity. When sleep finally came, it arrived not like a collapse, but like a threshold crossed, a door I chose. And if laughter rose from a room across the hall in the dream that followed, it was mine, louder than lilies, lighter than lies, sized exactly to the life I was beginning.